She didn't mean to say it out loud. That was the thing that broke me when she told me later. She wasn't trying to perform her pain for anyone. She was just talking to her daughter, the way you do when you're exhausted and you think nobody's listening. But someone was. And that someone changed everything. Let me tell you about Miriam Ose. Let me tell you about the worst Sunday of her life, which turned out to be the first day of the rest of it. The kids were fighting over a fork. Not a toy. A fork. One plastic fork with a bent tine that had come free with a kid's meal about 6 months ago. And somehow both of her daughters, Amara 9 and Cece 6, had decided this particular fork was worth going to war over on a Sunday morning when Miriam had exactly $4.37 in her checking account. Cece let go. It's mine. It's not yours, it doesn't belong to anybody, it came with nuggets. Then it's both of ours. Then you're only getting half. Cece burst into tears with the theatrical commitment of a child who has studied crying as an art form. Miriam stood in the kitchen of their 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, wearing a shirt she'd slept in and sweatpants with a bleach stain on the left knee, watching her daughters destroy each other over a fork. The coffee maker had stopped working 2 weeks ago. She hadn't replaced it because that would have meant $40 she didn't have. So every morning she boiled water in a saucepan like it was 1890. She was 34 years old. She had a degree in business administration that was currently stored in a cardboard box under her bed. She had been a loan officer at Meridian Community Bank for 6 years until 14 months ago, when the branch closed and her entire department was eliminated in a single Monday morning meeting. She had sent out 93 job applications since then. She had received 11 interviews. She had received 0 offers. She'd taken 2 part-time jobs to fill the gap. 3 nights a week at a distribution center running packages through a scanner. Saturday mornings at a dry cleaner's on Broad Street, where the steam made her hair frizz for the rest of the day, and the owner, a man named Gerald who wore a lot of cologne, called her sweetheart, in a way that made her jaw tight. He was keeping them alive. But just stop, she said, and something in her voice made both girls go still. Put the fork down. Eat your cereal. We're leaving in 40 minutes. Where are we going? Mar asked. Miriam hesitated. She'd been trying to figure out how to say this since Thursday. Grandma Ada's. The silence that followed was complicated. Ada Ose was Miriam's mother-in-law. Former mother-in-law. Ex-mother-in-law. The mother of Kofi Ose, who had been Miriam's husband for 4 years and her boyfriend for 2 before that, and who had left 18 months ago for a woman named Destiny, which Miriam still found cosmically unfair as a name. Destiny was 26. He was a personal trainer. She did not have 2 children by her own account. Kofi paid child support. Sometimes. When he remembered. When Destiny wasn't expensive that month. Ada, however, was different. Ada Ose had called Miriam every Sunday since the divorce. Every single Sunday without fail, usually around 3 in the afternoon, and she would ask about the girls, ask about Miriam's health, and occasionally say things about her son that made Miriam want to laugh and cry simultaneously. He was always like this, Ada had told her once. Even as a boy. He wanted the shiniest thing until he had it. Then he wanted the next shiniest thing. I tried to tell you. She hadn't tried to tell her. But Miriam let her have it. Ada had called Thursday and asked if the girls could come for Sunday lunch. She'd made jollof. She'd made puff puff. She'd said, bring yourself too. You look like you need feeding. Miriam had not told Ada about the $4.37. She had not told Ada about the eviction warning she'd found slipped under her door on Wednesday. She had not told Ada about a lot of things. She was 34 years old and she was still trying to pretend she was fine. The bus took 45 minutes with 1 transfer. Amara spent most of it with her headphones in, doing the kind of elaborate social diplomacy that 9-year-olds do on their phones, demanding friends with the intensity of someone negotiating international treaties. Cece fell asleep with her head on Miriam's arm. Miriam looked out the window at Columbus sliding past. She'd grown up here. She'd gone to school here, gotten married here, had her children here. It had always felt like home. Now sometimes it felt like a place that had moved on without her while she was busy surviving. She pulled out her phone and checked her email. The Renfrew financial rejection had come in at 6:52 in the morning. They were going with someone with more recent experience in the mortgage sector. She appreciated her interest. They wished her the best. She locked her phone and looked back out the window. Cece made a small snuffling sound in her sleep and burrowed deeper into Miriam's side. This is fine, Miriam thought. This is survivable. People survive worse than this every day. Then the bus lurched, Cece jolted awake, and Miriam spent the next 10 minutes talking her daughter through the terrifying ordeal of having briefly been asleep on a bus, and she didn't have time to fall back into the dark place, which was sometimes its own kind of mercy. Ada Osei was a small woman who cooked like she was feeding an army. Her house in Eastmoor was the same house she'd lived in for 30 years, a brick two-bedroom with a garden that she ran with absolute authority. Rose bushes along the front walk. Tomatoes in the back. Herbs in clay pots on the kitchen windowsill that she talked to when she thought nobody was listening. She opened the door before they knocked. Come in, come in, come in. She pulled Cece in first because Cece always let herself be pulled, then wrapped her arms around Amara, who tolerated it with the dignity of someone who had recently turned 9 and therefore aged out of being enthusiastic about hugs. Then Ada looked at Miriam. She had the eyes of a woman who had seen a great deal and processed very little of it quietly. You've lost weight, she said. I'm fine. I didn't say you weren't fine. I said you lost weight. Ada stepped aside to let her in. Come eat something. The house smelled like jollof rice and the particular sharp sweetness of puff frying in oil. And underneath that, something floral, the small bowl of dried lavender Ada kept on the mantel that she claimed helped with her arthritis but which Miriam suspected was just because she liked the way it smelled. The girls disappeared immediately. They knew this house. They knew the drawer in the spare room where Ada kept old magazines and craft supplies, the tin box in the kitchen with the biscuits she wasn't supposed to have because of her blood pressure but which she kept anyway as a matter of principle. Miriam sat at the kitchen table. You don't have to feed me, she said. Really? I didn't ask your opinion. Ada ladled rice into a bowl. Drink some water. You have that look. What look? The one where you've been holding your jaw tight for 3 days and you don't notice anymore. Miriam reached up and touched her jaw. She felt the ache, the small persistent soreness she'd stopped registering because it was always there. Ada set the bowl in front of her. Then she sat down across the table and folded her hands and waited. This was Ada's particular superpower. She could wait. Miriam lasted about 40 seconds. I got another rejection this morning, she said. That's 93 applications. 14 months. I'm doing everything right. I'm updating my resume. I'm networking. I've taken 2 online certifications since the layoff. Nothing. Ada nodded slowly. I have an eviction warning, Miriam said. I'm 2 months behind. I have until the 15th of next month or they file. That's 22 days. I did the math. Even with both part-time jobs, I cannot come up with what I owe before the 15th. She hadn't said that out loud to anyone. Saying it out loud made it real in a new and terrible way. Okay, Ada said. I don't know what to do. Her voice stayed even. She was proud of that. I genuinely don't know what to do and I can't tell the girls because Amara already worries, she already notices things and Cece is 6, she's 6 years old, she should be worried about the stupid fork, not whether we're going to have a place to live, Miriam. She stopped. You're going to breathe, Ada said. And then we're going to figure it out. How? How are we going to figure it out? The same way you've figured out everything else, Ada said. One piece at a time. They spent the next hour going through Miriam's finances at the kitchen table with a legal pad and 2 pens while the girls watched a movie in the living room. Ada had savings. She offered them without drama, the way she'd offered everything in the years Miriam had known her, like it was just a practical consideration, like it was the obvious next thing. I can't take your savings, Miriam said. You're not taking anything. I'm lending. You'll pay me back when you can. Ada, do you have a better idea? Miriam looked at the legal pad with its columns of numbers, all of them going the wrong direction. No, she said. Then stop arguing. After lunch, after puff, After Cece had decided she was a tomato expert and had been allowed to pick two from the garden with Ada standing over her like a benevolent supervisor, they went to a diner. This was a tradition that predated the divorce. Every Sunday that they visited Ada, they went to Davis Street Diner for pie. It had started when Amara was 18 months old and they discovered that the specific combination of a restaurant high chair and a piece of cherry pie kept her quiet for 20 minutes. It had calcified into ritual over the years. The diner was a diner in the old-fashioned sense. Red vinyl booths. Chrome napkin dispensers. A counter with spinning stools that Cece was currently using like a carnival ride while the waitress pretended not to notice. They took a booth near the window. The girls ordered pie, which was the point. Ada ordered coffee. Miriam ordered water and then, because Ada gave her a look, ordered a slice of lemon meringue she didn't particularly want. The booth next to them was empty when they sat down. It wasn't empty for long. A man came in alone about 5 minutes after they settled. Miriam noticed him the way you notice things peripherally when you're not really paying attention. Somewhere in his late 30s. Dark jacket. The kind of tired that wasn't just physical but settled into a person. He was on his phone when the hostess led him to the booth beside theirs, and he sat facing the window, which meant his back was to them. Miriam forgot about him immediately. Ada was telling a story about her neighbor's new dog. Cece was attempting to eat pie with structural ambition that exceeded her motor skills. Amara was watching Cece with the critical attention of an older sister who was building a dossier. "She's going to wear it," Amara said. "I'm not going to wear it," Cece said. "You have meringue on your ear." Cece reached up and felt her ear. Found meringue. Looked at it. Considered her options. "That's for later," she decided. Miriam started laughing, and for a moment, just a moment, the weight lifted entirely. She was sitting in a diner with her daughters and her former mother-in-law, and there was pie on someone's ear and she was laughing, and it was fine. It was good. This moment was genuinely, completely good. Then Ada said, "Have you been on any dates?" And the moment ended. "No," Miriam said. "You should." "Ada. You're 34. I'm aware of how old I am. You're a beautiful woman. You're intelligent. You worked hard your whole life." Ada stirred her coffee. "You deserve someone good. I don't have time for someone good. You don't have time because you don't make time. Because you talk yourself out of it. I talk myself out of it because..." Miriam lowered her voice, conscious of the girls, conscious of the man in the next booth even though she couldn't see his face. "Because who's going to want this, Ada? I'm broke. I'm fighting an eviction. I have 2 kids. I'm exhausted all the time. Nobody signs up for that." Ada opened her mouth. And this is the part that Miriam would replay later. Would replay for years probably. Because what came out of her mouth in the next 5 seconds was not planned. It wasn't a statement she'd made before. It was just the truest, most unguarded thing she'd said in 14 months. Coming out because she was tired and the pie was there and Ada was the one person she could be undone in front of. She said in a low voice, half to Ada and half to nobody, "Nobody marries women with children anyway. Everybody acts like they will. But they don't." She glanced at the girls. Amara was focused on her pie. Cece was still managing the structural crisis of hers. Neither of them had heard. Ada looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite anger. It was older than both of those things. "That is the most wrong thing you've ever said," Ada told her. "And you've said some wrong things. It's not true. It's mostly true. It's not." And then the man in the next booth stood up. He wasn't standing theatrically. He wasn't doing it for effect. He'd clearly been in the process of getting up to leave anyway, his jacket half on one arm, his phone already in his hand, his wallet open because he was about to leave cash on the table. But he stopped. He stood there half in, half out of his booth, not looking at them directly but not moving either. Miriam saw him from the corner of her eye and felt the immediate mortification of someone who has just realized they've been overheard saying something private. He was closer than she'd realized. The booths were right next to each other. She'd forgotten about him. She'd spoken in what she thought was a low voice but apparently wasn't low enough. He put his wallet back in his pocket without leaving the cash. He turned. She braced herself. For pity. For some kind of terrible well-intentioned comment. For the thing men sometimes did where they tried to make you feel better in a way that actually made everything worse. Instead he said very quietly to nobody in particular, "My wife died 3 years ago. She had a 9-year-old son." He paused. "He's 12 now. He's mine. In every way that matters." He looked out the window, not at any of them, just at the street. "I just thought you should know that." Then he put his jacket on properly, went to the counter, paid for his coffee and walked out the door. Miriam sat completely still. Ada was looking at the door the man had walked through. Cece looked up from her pie with the delayed awareness of a 6-year-old who has just noticed something happened. "Who was that?" Cece asked. "A person," Ada said, and she sounded like she was trying to keep something in her voice from surfacing. "What did he say?" "Something important," Ada said. He looked at Miriam. Miriam was looking at the door. She thought about him on the bus home. She thought about him while she put Cece to bed and read 2 chapters of the book about the girl who discovers she can talk to birds, which they were both pretending was for Cece but which Miriam also genuinely wanted to know the ending of. She thought about him at the distribution center on Tuesday night, running packages through the scanner, the thud and click of it rhythmic enough to stop actual thought but not enough to stop feeling. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he looked like in the light rather than from the side. She didn't know anything about him except that his wife had died and he had a boy who wasn't biologically his and he'd stayed for that boy anyway. It wasn't a love story. She wasn't foolish enough to make it one. It was just a sentence she needed to hear from a stranger who owed her nothing and gave it to her anyway. But it stayed with her. Like a splinter. Like a small warm coal. On Thursday she had an interview. The interview was for a compliance coordinator position at a company called Barwick Capital Group. It was not her dream job. It was a job, full stop, with benefits and a salary that would not just prevent the eviction but begin to make her whole again. She'd applied 4 months ago and heard nothing. Then 2 weeks ago she'd gotten an email from someone named Caroline Park, HR coordinator, asking if she was still available and interested. She'd responded within 3 minutes. The offices were downtown in one of the glass and steel towers that lined the main corridor of the financial district. She wore her interview suit, which still fit if she didn't breathe too deeply in it, which she took as a sign that her life was merely difficult and not completely catastrophic. The building's lobby had a coffee cart. She wanted one badly but didn't buy one because spending $4 on coffee before a job interview felt like tempting fate. Caroline Park was efficient and pleasant, with a competence that Miriam recognized and respected. She took Miriam through the job requirements, confirmed the salary range, explained the team structure. Then she said, "You'll also be meeting with the department head briefly today. He typically likes to meet final candidates. Just a quick conversation, nothing to be nervous about." "Of course," Miriam said and felt her heart rate adjust slightly upward. She sat in a waiting area for 11 minutes. Then a door opened. And the man from the diner walked out. He was different in the light. That was her first thought, which was not a particularly useful thought to be having. He was mid-30s, maybe 37 or 38. His jacket was the kind of business casual that people wore in finance when they wanted to signal that they were serious but also approachable. He was carrying a folder and wearing reading glasses that he pushed up as he came out. A gesture that made him look suddenly, briefly human in a way that the rest of him didn't. He stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. The moment lasted approximately 1,000 years. "You're the 3 o'clock, he said. He wasn't asking. "Apparently you're the department head," she said. "Daniel Reeves." He didn't reach out to shake her hand. He was still just looking at her, processing something. "You were in the diner." "Yes." "With the grandmother and the 2 girls." "Yes." Another pause. He said. He seemed to make some internal decision. "Come in." The office was orderly without being sterile. There was a photograph on the desk that she didn't look at directly. A plant in the corner that was a little overwatered. Stacks of files that were clearly his natural organizational system regardless of what anyone else thought about that. He sat down. She sat down. He opened her resume. 6 years at Meridian Community Bank, he said. Branch closed. I know what happened to Meridian." He read for a moment. You have your Series 7. Yes. Your compliance certifications are current? I updated them last spring. He read. She waited. She was good at waiting when she needed to be. Tell me about a time you identified a compliance issue before it became a problem, he said. This was the question she'd prepared for. This was the question she always prepared for. She told him about the third-party vendor audit she'd flagged at Meridian, a pattern of paperwork irregularities that turned out to be the front edge of a process failure, and how she'd brought it up the chain before it became a reportable incident. He listened the way people listen when they're actually listening rather than waiting for you to stop talking. What happened after? He asked. I was told it was handled. Was it? They brought in an outside audit. The process was fixed. The vendor contract wasn't renewed. She paused. I was also told I was very thorough, in a tone that made it clear they weren't sure that was a compliment. The corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. How do you handle it when thoroughness isn't welcomed? He asked. Carefully, she said. But I don't stop being thorough. I just get better at presenting it. He asked her 4 more questions. She answered all of them. At the end he closed the folder. He said, we'll be in touch by end of week. She stood up. Thank you for your time. She was almost at the door when he said, you were wrong by the way. She turned. What you said in the diner, he said. He wasn't looking at her with anything she could easily name. You were wrong. She held his gaze for a moment. Maybe, she said. She walked out. Caroline Park called Friday afternoon. Miriam was at the dry cleaners. Gerald had just called her sweetheart twice in one sentence. The steam was making her hair exactly as frizzy as it always did. She saw the number, excused herself, went out to the sidewalk. Miss O'Say, Caroline said. We'd like to offer you the position. Miriam pressed her back against the wall of the dry cleaners and closed her eyes. The salary we discussed, Caroline was saying. Full benefits, start date of the 14th if that works for you. Yes, Miriam said. That works for me. She stood on the sidewalk for 3 more minutes after the call ended. Cars went past. A kid on a bicycle rang his bell. Someone's lunch cart was doing a brisk business in gyros. He texted Ada. He got the job. Ada's response came back in 40 seconds. I know. Now go tell your girls. The first week at Barwick Capital was hard in the way new things are hard. New systems. New culture. New people who were all doing some version of figuring out who she was and whether they needed to adjust how they behaved around her. She was good at reading rooms. 6 years in banking had made her excellent at reading rooms. She knew within 3 days who the office's informal power structure was, which dynamics were functional and which were careful, who did the real work and who managed the appearance of doing real work. Daniel Reeves ran a department of 11 people with the specific style of someone who expects competence and respects it when he gets it. He wasn't warm in the office party sense. He was fair. There's a difference. He didn't treat her differently because of the diner. That was the thing she noticed first and appreciated most. He didn't tiptoe. He didn't over-explain things which some managers did with new employees from a misguided sense of helpfulness that actually communicated they thought you were fragile. He assigned her a real project in the 2nd week. He expected her to figure it out. She figured it out. What she didn't expect was Marcus. She heard about Marcus before she met him. This was office knowledge, the kind transmitted sideways through casual lunch conversation and the pauses before certain subjects. Daniel Reeves's department had a teammate named Marcus Grigg who'd been there 8 years, who considered himself the institutional memory of the department, and who had applied for a senior position 4 months ago that had instead been offered externally, a search that had eventually, after several false starts, resulted in a job posting that Miriam had applied to. She hadn't known this when she applied. She knew it by Wednesday of her 2nd week. Marcus Grigg was in his mid-40s, had perfect posture, an impeccable ability to make collaborative-sounding statements that were actually territorial, and the specific kind of professional smile that never reached the eyes. He introduced himself to Miriam on her 3rd day. Welcome, he said. We've all been curious about the hire. Hopefully I'll be useful, she said. I'm sure you'll do just fine, he said. Both of them knew what he meant. Neither of them said it. 3 weeks in, Miriam found something. She was reviewing a batch of fund documentation routine work, the kind that required patience and a particular tolerance for repetition. And she found it in the way she always found things. Because she was thorough, and because being thorough was both her professional calling and apparently not always a compliment. A pattern. Small reporting discrepancies in quarterly filings. Nothing that screamed in isolation. But layered 3 separate funds across 6 quarters, the same category of adjustment occurring just below the threshold that triggered additional review. She looked at it for 2 days before she mentioned it to anyone. When she did, she mentioned it to Daniel. Not because she was trying to prove herself. Because he was her manager and this was something he needed to know. She brought it the same way she'd brought the Meridian thing 8 years ago. Organized, documented, specific about what she knew and honest about what she wasn't sure of. He read what she'd put together. He looked up. He said, "How long have you been looking at this?" 2 days formally. "I first noticed it last week." "You didn't mention it last week." "I wanted to make sure I wasn't seeing a pattern that wasn't there." "And now?" "Now I think I'm not." He read it again. Slower. Then he said, "Leave this with me. Don't talk to anyone else about it." She nodded and went back to her desk. 2 hours later, Marcus stopped by. "I hear you've been going deep on the quarterly filing archives," he said. She kept her face neutral. "Just trying to get familiar with the historical documentation. Those funds have been processed consistently for years. I personally reviewed several of those quarters." "Good to know the history," she said. His smile didn't shift. His eyes did. "Daniel's door was closed for a while this afternoon," he said. "Meetings happen," she said. He nodded once. Walked away. She waited until he was gone and then sat very still at her desk for a long moment. Someone had told him. The campaign against Miriam was not loud. That was what made it difficult to fight. It was subtle and patient and deniable. The kind of thing that a person could, if confronted, describe as concern rather than sabotage. There were the questions that sounded like questions but were actually statements. "Did you run that approach by anyone before you submitted it?" "Just curious." There was the information that arrived to Miriam just slightly too late to use. A client meeting she was supposed to attend where she got the room number wrong because she'd been told the wrong room. There was the email that was CC'd to half the department in which Marcus corrected a methodology she'd used. One that was not actually incorrect but that could be made to look questionable if you were the one framing it. And then there was the story. She heard it third hand, as these things always surface. A version of events in which Miriam had been flagging issues in the quarterly filings as a play for visibility. Not because she'd found something real. Because she was new, she was trying to establish herself, she was maybe not entirely secure in her abilities. Nobody said this directly to her. That was the point. She found out when one of the junior analysts, a young woman named Priya who had never once been anything but straightforward with her, stopped by her desk and said very quietly, "I just want you to know that some of what's being said isn't coming from me. I want you to know that." "What's being said?" Miriam asked. Priya told her. Miriam thanked her. She went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at herself in the mirror. She thought about the distribution center. She thought about Gerald and his cologne and his sweetheart. She thought about the eviction warning, the bus, the legal pad on Ada's kitchen table, the 93 applications. She thought about what it had taken to get here. She dried her hands. She went back to her desk. She opened the quarterly filing documentation again. And she got back to work. What Miriam did next took 3 weeks. She went back through 5 years of filings. All of them. She pulled every comparable document she could access. The industry standards, the regulatory guidelines, the internal Barwick policies. She built a timeline. She found that the pattern she'd identified wasn't just a pattern. It was a signature. The same adjustments, the same timing, the same methodology across funds that had, at various points, touched the same set of client accounts. It wasn't a major fraud. She wasn't uncovering a Hollywood-scale financial crime. But it was real. And it was systematic. And it had been present in the filings that Marcus Grigg had personally reviewed and signed off on. She did not go to Daniel with this. Not yet. She made a copy of everything and kept it at home. Then she went to the compliance officer. Her name was Diane Frost. She'd been Barwick's chief compliance officer for 9 years. She had the particular quality of someone who has survived institutional politics long enough to know exactly where all the bodies are buried without having buried any of them herself. Miriam requested a meeting through the official channel. She presented her documentation. She said, "I understand this may be uncomfortable given certain internal dynamics. I'm presenting it anyway because it's my job and because it's the right thing to do." Diane Frost looked at the documentation for a long time. Then she said, "How long have you been here?" 7 weeks. "And you found this in 7 weeks?" "I was reviewing historical documentation to get familiar with the work." "And you brought it here instead of just letting it go?" "Yes." Diane looked at her for a moment with an expression Miriam couldn't fully read. "Leave this with me," she said. "I have copies," Miriam said. "Good," Diane said. "Keep them." Nothing happened for 12 days. Then everything happened at once. She came in on a Tuesday morning and Marcus Grigg was not at his desk. His computer was gone. His chair was pushed in with the careful finality of something that wasn't coming back. Nobody said anything. By 10 o'clock, the department had the specific electric charge of a workplace when something has happened but hasn't been officially addressed yet. When everybody is performing normalcy over the top of knowing something significant has shifted. At 11, Caroline from HR appeared in the doorway and spoke quietly to 2 other team members. At 11:40, Daniel Reeves called Miriam into his office. She sat down. He looked tired in a different way than she'd seen before. The kind of tired that comes from a hard week rather than a general life orientation. "The compliance review is complete," he said. "The issues you identified are being addressed. There will be some regulatory reporting required. Some adjustments to internal process." She waited. "Marcus has been let go," he said. She didn't say anything. "I want to tell you something," Daniel said. He seemed to choose his words carefully. "What you did, bringing that forward the way you did, directly and completely without trying to manage the politics of it. That's the kind of work this department needs to do. And the fact that it was difficult to do it, that there were pressures working against you and you did it anyway." He paused. "That matters." "I was doing my job," she said. "You were doing your job while someone was actively trying to undermine you in your first 2 months here." She looked at her hands for a moment. "I've been undermined before," she said. "At jobs that mattered less." He nodded. There was a beat of silence that was not awkward exactly but was full of something. "How are your daughters?" he asked. She looked up. He said it simply, without artifice, the way someone asks about something they genuinely wonder about. "Amara's good," she said. "She's 9 and she has very strong opinions about everything. Cece is 6. She's currently going through a phase where she names all food before eating it." He almost smiled. "Names it. Like she'll hold up a piece of broccoli and say, 'Hello, Gregory,' and then eat it." He did smile then fully and it changed his face in a way that caught her off guard. "My son went through something like that," he said. "He named our cars. All of them. For 3 years. How old is he now?" 12. He plays hockey. He has opinions about everything too, but in a 12-year-old boy way, which mostly means he's very certain that he's right about things he's completely wrong about. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. He looked at her for a moment. "I should let you get back," he said. But he said it like he wasn't entirely sure that was what he wanted. She stood up. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah. Thank you. For the opportunity. She stopped, and then because he'd been honest with her in a diner and in this office and he'd hired her when he didn't have to, she said, "For taking me seriously from the beginning." "That was easy," he said. "You made it easy." That night Kofi called. This was not unusual. Kofi called periodically when he felt guilty or when something reminded him he had children or both. "I heard you got a new job," he said. "Congratulations." "Thank you," she said. He was making dinner. She had the phone balanced between her ear and shoulder, stirring something she was trying to make interesting with the spices she'd finally been able to buy again. "I also wanted to talk to you about the summer," he said. What about it? Destiny and I are thinking about Cancun in June. I was wondering if the girls could come. Miriam put the spoon down very carefully on the counter. To Cancun, she said. Just for a week. They'd love it. The beach, the pools, Kofi. When did you last see your daughters? Christmas, he said. Christmas. It's April. You haven't seen them since Christmas, you haven't sent February support, and now you want to take them to Cancun. I told you about the support, my cash flow. Your cash flow is fine, she said. You posted a picture from a steakhouse last week. That was a work thing. I'm not doing this, she said. Not loudly. With finality. When you want to see the girls, actually see them, local, consistent, predictable, call me. When February's support arrives, call me. But I'm not negotiating Cancun vacations over the phone while I make dinner. She hung up. Amara appeared in the kitchen doorway. Was that Dad? Yes. Amara looked at her face and had the wisdom not to ask any more questions. She just came and stood next to her mother at the stove and looked at what was in the pan. Is that chicken? Yes. It smells good. Thank you. Can I stir it? Yes, Miriam said. She handed her the spoon. Stir it. They stood there together at the stove, her daughter stirring dinner, the kitchen smelling good, and Miriam breathed. She did not expect anything to happen. That is the honest truth. She was not building toward something when she agreed to get coffee with Daniel Reeves. It started because of a Saturday. He'd emailed her on a Friday afternoon about a document she'd submitted, a small technical thing, and she'd replied, and the email exchange went back and forth a few times with increasing informality until somehow they were no longer talking about the document. He mentioned he was taking his son, whose name was Sam, to a hockey game Saturday. Sam was playing in a tournament. Did she know anything about hockey? She did not know anything about hockey. He sent her a one-paragraph explanation of hockey that was clearly written for someone who had never seen a puck. She sent back 3 specific clarifying questions designed to suggest she found hockey genuinely interesting, which she absolutely did not. He called her instead of emailing the answers. They talked for 45 minutes. She was folding laundry. She sat down on the couch and stopped folding laundry and just talked to him, and it was easy, and she had forgotten that this was something that could be easy, just talking to another person. And when she finally looked up, she realized the laundry was still in a pile and she needed to start Cece's bath, and it was genuinely, truly fine. They got coffee. Then they got dinner without the girls, which required logistics and Ada's involvement and some complicated calendar management, and which was just dinner at a restaurant neither of them had been to before, which made it neutral ground. He told him about the bank, about losing the job, about the applications, all 93 of them, about the distribution center and the dry cleaner and Gerald and the eviction warning. She told him these things matter-of-factly, the way you do when you're far enough past the worst of something that you can describe it without it swallowing you. He told her about his wife. Her name was Rachel. They'd met in college. They'd been married 6 years. She'd been a pediatric nurse, which he said with the specific kind of pride that only comes from someone who was genuinely in awe of the person they loved. She'd been diagnosed with an aggressive cancer when their son was 6. He died when Sam was 9. He remembers her, Daniel said. That's the thing I'm most grateful for. He has real memories of her. He was old enough. I'm glad, she said. The first year was... He stopped. Considered. I don't have a word for the first year. You don't need one, she said. He looked at her across the table. No, he agreed. I guess I don't. They talked for 3 hours. She got home before midnight. The girls were at Ada's. The apartment was quiet. She stood in the kitchen and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't hope exactly. It was more like the possibility of hope. The recognition that the door hadn't closed permanently. It was enough. For now it was enough. The complication came from somewhere she didn't expect. It came from Amara. Amara was 9 and observant and not always right but usually correctly pointed. She'd noticed something in the way her mother talked about work. The specific way Miriam said Daniel's name. It was nothing obvious. It was a nothing thing that a 9-year-old who had been paying attention to her mother's voice and face for 9 years would detect. She brought it up on a Wednesday evening while they were doing homework. Is Daniel your boyfriend? Miriam looked up from the fractions worksheet she was checking. No, she said. He's my manager. He's my friend. Okay, Amara said. Then, would it be bad if he was? Miriam set the worksheet down. What do you mean? I mean. Amara chewed her pencil, which Miriam had told her not to do approximately 900 times. Like, would that be bad for us? Miriam looked at her daughter for a moment. 9 years old. The person who had kept her going through 14 months of quiet catastrophe, just by existing, just by needing breakfast and asking questions and having homework that needed to be checked. That's a good question, she said. And I want to give you a real answer. Amara waited. It wouldn't be bad for us. Not ever. Nothing I do changes how you and Cece are my most important thing. That doesn't shift. But it might change things, Amara said. Life changes things. Things changed already. Things kept changing and we kept being okay. She looked at her daughter steadily. Are you asking me because you're worried about it? Or because you wanted to ask and you wanted me to know you noticed? Amara considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Both, she said. Fair enough, Miriam said. She picked the worksheet back up. Amara said, he seems nice. From what you say. He is, Miriam said. He's a good person. Does he have kids? He has a son. He's 12. Older than me. Yes. Amara thought about this. Does Sam like hockey? He plays hockey. I think hockey is kind of violent. Okay. But I might watch it sometime. Like hypothetically. Miriam kept her face completely neutral. Hypothetically, she confirmed. Yeah, Amara said. And picked up her pencil again. Hypothetically. There is a thing that people who carry a lot of weight for a long time eventually have to unlearn. The assumption that asking for anything is dangerous. That needing anything is weakness. That depending on someone even a little, even for something small, is a step toward catastrophe because everything falls away eventually and you should stay ready. Miriam had learned this lesson the hard way. She'd learned it from a man who'd seemed solid and turned out to be provisional. She'd learned it from a bank that closed with 2 weeks' notice. She'd learned it from a world that had spent 14 months politely but firmly declining to make room for her. So when things with Daniel began to feel like more than a careful friendship, when the dinners became easier and the phone calls became longer and her daughters asked increasingly specific hypothetical questions about hockey and 12-year-olds and what kind of pizza someone named Sam might like, Miriam did the thing she knew how to do. She stepped back. Not all the way. But enough. She was careful at work. She was appropriate. She didn't let anything be visible that hadn't been consciously chosen. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. He said on a Thursday afternoon when they were the last 2 people in the office and she was getting her things to leave, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Have I done something wrong?" She stopped putting things in her bag. "No," she said. "Because it feels like something changed." She was quiet for a moment. "Nothing changed," she said. She stopped. He waited. "I'm not good at this," she said. "At it being easy. It being easy makes me nervous. Because when things were easy before, they stopped being easy." "Yes. I understand that," he said. "I spent 2 years not buying a couch because buying a new couch felt like making a permanent decision about what my life was going to be now, and I couldn't do it." She looked at him. "A couch," she said. "A couch," he confirmed. "Ridiculous. What did you sit on?" "The old couch. It was fine. I just wouldn't replace it." She almost smiled. "Did you ever replace it?" "Sam's 13-year-old hockey bag finally convinced me." "Smell. Catastrophic." She did smile then. He didn't push anything. He didn't explain what he was offering or ask her to define something. He just stood there with his jacket over his arm and his keys in his hand and let her figure out what she needed to say. "I don't know how to do this when there's so much that could go wrong," she said finally. "There's a lot that could go wrong," he agreed. "There's also a lot that could be good." "Those are the same situation." "Yes," he said. "They are." He picked up her bag. "Pie kids," she started. "Are part of it," he said. "That's not a problem. That was never a problem." She looked at him for a long moment. Give me some time, she said. You have it, he said. Take whatever you need. She walked out. He got to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. The elevator arrived. She didn't get in. She stood there for a moment. Then she turned around. He was still standing where she'd left him, jacket over his arm, watching her go with an expression that was carefully trying not to be anything. She walked back. She stopped about 4 feet from him. I said I needed time, she said. You did. And I do. She hesitated. But I don't want you to think that means I don't already know. Know what? That this is, she stopped. Started again. That you're a good person. And that this could be a good thing. He looked at her for a moment. He said. Simple as that. Okay, she said. She went home. 3 months later. Davis Street Diner on a Sunday. Same booth near the window. It wasn't intentional, it was just the table that was available, and Miriam noticed it with a specific kind of amusement. Ada was across from her, drinking coffee. The girls were there. Cece was attempting something ambitious with the pie again. Amara had her headphones in but one ear out, which was her way of monitoring while pretending not to. And Sam was there. 12 years old, gangly in the way 12-year-olds are, with his father's eyes and what turned out to be a very specific and deeply held opinion about hockey strategy that he was explaining to Ada with the confidence of someone who had never in his life been underestimated. Ada was listening with complete attention, the way she listened to everything and everyone. Cece had decided upon being introduced that Sam was acceptable. Her metric for this was whether he found her fork story funny, which he did, which made him acceptable. Amara had not yet issued a formal verdict. Daniel sat next to Miriam. Not across from her. Next to her, the way you sit with someone when you're not performing a conversation but having one, the way you sit when you've made a decision and the decision has settled. Your mother-in-law likes him, Miriam said. Your daughter is grilling him. That's just her way of deciding if she likes you. Me. By extension. You're connected. She watched Amara watch Sam. She'll have a finding by the end of the pie. What are the criteria? I genuinely don't know. She doesn't share the rubric. He laughed. She looked around the booth. Her daughters. A 12-year-old explaining the offside rule to a 70-year-old woman who was asking increasingly specific follow-up questions. The pie. The chrome napkin dispensers. The window letting in Sunday light. She thought about the last time she'd sat in this exact diner. She thought about $4.37. 93 applications. An eviction warning slipped under a door. She thought about a sentence that slipped out when she was tired. Nobody marries women with children anyway. She looked at Daniel, who was watching Sam and Ada's conversation with the expression of someone who has been genuinely surprised by how well something is going. She thought about how the most important things in her life had arrived sideways. Not the way she planned or expected or built toward. They arrived at the next table. They arrived as a man standing up. They arrived as a job she'd been rejected from 93 times before, finally on the 94th try, saying yes. They arrived as an eviction warning that forced her to tell the truth to Ada, which made Ada loan her money, which kept her housed until the salary cleared. They arrived as a daughter who named her food and a daughter who grilled 12-year-olds and a former mother-in-law who cooked like she was feeding armies and who had looked at Miriam across a kitchen table and said, I know. Now go tell your girls. They arrived as everything she'd thought was wrong with her life turning out to be the exact shape of the life she was supposed to have. Miriam, Daniel said quietly. She looked at him. You okay? She thought about what he'd said to her once, in a conversation that had started about a compliance document and ended somewhere neither of them expected. Some obligations transcend logic. Some bonds can't be severed. She thought about how the man who said that had also spent 2 years refusing to buy a couch. She thought about how that was exactly who she needed. Not someone without fear. Someone who had fear and kept going anyway. Yes, she said. And she meant it in every possible sense of the word. There's a thing Ada says. She has always said it, through the good years and the hard ones, through a husband she buried and a son she watched make mistakes and a daughter-in-law she watched survive them. She says, things find their shape in their own time. You can't force the shape. You just have to survive until you see it. Miriam didn't believe this for a long time. She believed in planning. In control. In building things deliberately and not leaving anything to accident or chance or strangers in diners who happened to overhear something she didn't mean to say out loud. Here is what she knows now. You can believe in planning and still be wrong about what the plan is for. You can be thorough and careful and work as hard as anyone has ever worked and still hit a wall that has nothing to do with your effort or your worth or your deserving. And then sometimes, when you are tired enough to stop performing fine, when you are sitting in a booth with pie on your daughter's ear and a cup of water because you can't afford the lemon meringue, when you let the truest thing out of your mouth without meaning to, sometimes someone hears it. Not someone who wants to save you. Not someone who pities you. Someone who was sitting with their own grief in the next booth and who recognized something true when they heard it and stood up and gave you the one sentence you needed, the one that cost them nothing except the 4 words that changed everything. He's mine. In every way that matters. That man was Daniel Reeves. He went home after the diner that Sunday and made dinner for Sam and helped him with a history project about the civil rights movement and put him to bed and sat in his kitchen alone for a while, thinking about a woman he'd never met and would probably never see again. Then 7 weeks later she sat across from him in an interview room. He hired her because she was the best candidate. Full stop. He fell in love with her because she was Miriam. These things are not separate. They are, in fact, the same thing. Amara issued her verdict at the end of the pie. Sam is fine, she said, with the judicial gravitas of a 9-year-old who has considered carefully. Cece had already decided Sam was fine approximately 4 minutes in, when he'd looked at her pie and said very solemnly, "What is his name?" And Cece had beamed and said, "Gerald." And Sam had said without missing a beat, "Good name for a pie." And Cece had eaten Gerald with the satisfaction of someone who has been genuinely understood. Miriam watched this happen and felt something complete. Not finished. Not over. Complete the way things feel when they are exactly what they are meant to be, not in spite of the hard parts but because of them. Because of the 93 rejections and the $4 and the plastic fork and the eviction warning and the Sunday bus and the dry cleaner and Gerald and his cologne and the legal pad on Ada's table. Because of all of it. Every single bit. She didn't mean to say it out loud. But I'm glad she did. And if you've ever sat somewhere and let the truest thing slip out when you thought no one was listening, someone was. And they stood up. And they're still standing. If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself thinking about Miriam at the dry cleaners or Ada's kitchen, or a man who stood up in a diner when he didn't have to, hit that like button. Share it with someone who's in their hard year. The one where the applications keep coming back wrong and the fridge is making that sound and the coffee maker is broken and they're somehow still getting up every morning. Tell them Ada's thing. Tell them, things find their shape in their own time. Subscribe for stories about the people who don't give up. And drop a comment below. What's the truest thing you've said out loud when you thought nobody was listening? You might be surprised who stood up.